Scarlett Vance knew she was fired the second she slapped Korea's richest CEO across the face in his own penthouse suite. 1 second, Kang Min-ho was blocking the door after catching her sneaking out with resignation papers in her bag the next. The sound of that slap echoed through the entire room. Security froze. His assistant looked horrified. But instead of exploding, Min-ho slowly turned back toward Scarlett with a look that made her stomach drop because for the first time in years, the emotionless billionaire was smiling. Then he said 5 words that completely destroyed her escape plan. So you finally feel something too. Welcome to Wonderpath Stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The night it all began, Scarlett Vance was not supposed to be on the 43rd floor. She was supposed to be finishing her shift report, signing off on the late VIP arrivals, and going back to the small studio apartment she shared with her best friend Talia 3 blocks from the Grand Hyun residence in Busan. That was the plan. Quiet, professional, invisible. The same plan she had followed every single day for the past 18 months in South Korea. But the emergency call came in at 11:47 p.m., and the guest relations system routed her to suite 4300 instead of 4301 because someone in management had transposed 2 numbers and nobody had caught it. So Scarlett grabbed her emergency kit, straightened her blazer, and used her master keycard without knocking because the incident report said medical and every second counted. She was not prepared for what she found. No one was bleeding out on the floor. No one was having a cardiac episode. The suite was completely dark except for the pale blue glow of a city skyline pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows. On the dining table sat an untouched dinner, still covered, growing cold. And in the center of the room, seated in a chair facing the window like a man holding court over the entire city of Busan, was a figure she almost didn't notice because he was so completely still. Then she saw the glass. Shards of it spread across the white marble floor like scattered stars. A broken whiskey tumbler. And near his right hand, wrapped loosely in a folded handkerchief that was already blooming red, was the evidence that at least one of those shards had found a target. Scarlett's training took over before her common sense could stop it. She stepped further into the room, pulling a small first aid supply from her kit, and said calmly, "Sir, I'm from guest relations. I was called about an emergency on this floor." "Are you injured?" He didn't answer immediately. He didn't move. He just continued staring out at the city with the absolute stillness of someone who had learned a very long time ago that showing discomfort was a form of weakness. Then, without turning around, he said, "You don't knock." His voice was low, quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't gentle at all but instead occupied every inch of a room the way silence occupied a space right before something broke. Scarlett didn't flinch. The system flagged it as a medical emergency. Protocol doesn't include knocking when someone might be on the floor. A pause. Then he turned slightly, just enough for the city light to catch the sharp line of his jaw, the blood seeping through the handkerchief. "Most people," he said, "don't walk into my life without permission." Scarlett met his eyes across the darkened room and felt something shift in her chest that she did not name, refused to name, and absolutely did not have time for. "Most people," she replied evenly, "don't leave broken glass all over the floor." Something moved across his face, not a smile. Closer to recognition, she crossed the room and crouched beside him and began working. She was efficient, methodical, her hands steady even as she was acutely, uncomfortably aware of the fact that the man seated before her was Kang Min-ho, 25 years old, CEO and undisputed head of the Kang Maritime Group, one of the largest shipping empires in East Asia. But that was his public title, the one printed in Forbes profiles and business journals. The other title, the one spoken in quieter rooms by people who understood how power actually moved in this city, was different. It was heavier. It followed him like a shadow he had learned to walk ahead of. He didn't say a word while she cleaned and dressed the wound. He watched her hands, just her hands, with an attention that felt almost surgical. When she finished and stood, she said, "You should have that checked by an actual doctor in the morning. The cut is shallow, but the placement is awkward." She gathered her kit. "I'll have the floor cleaned and a fresh dinner sent up." She turned to leave. "Your name?" She stopped. Not a question, not exactly. "Scarlett Vance," she said without turning around. "Guest relations. Good night, Mr. Kang." She walked out. And Kang Min-ho sat in the dark for a long time afterward, staring at the door she had just closed. thinking about the only person in 3 years who had walked into his space and looked at him not with fear, not with strategy, and not with want. Just with the same calm, steady professionalism she would have given anyone. Like he was a difficult client and nothing more. He thought about that for a very long time. The next morning, Talia Brooks nearly spilled her coffee when she heard. "He requested you," she said, staring at Scarlett over the rim of her mug. "Specifically, by name." They were standing in the staff corridor just before their shift started, and the way Talia was looking at her, Scarlett already knew this conversation was about to become a problem. "It's a standard VIP accommodation request," Scarlett said. "He's the long-term penthouse resident. He can request a specific guest liaison." "Has never," Talia said, enunciating slowly, "requested any specific guest liaison in the entire 14 months he has lived in that building. Not once. The man barely acknowledges that other humans exist." She set her mug down. "And now he wants you specifically. Scarlett, you who have exactly 6 weeks left on your contract before you go back to Chicago and never look at another luxury residence again." Scarlett straightened her blazer. "I'll handle it professionally." "That's what I'm afraid of." The first interaction that day was brief. Min-ho needed the dining room reconfigured for a private business call. Scarlett arrived, assessed the layout, made adjustments, confirmed his requirements, and left. He said approximately 12 words to her the entire time, but she felt his eyes follow her to the door. The second interaction was in the late afternoon. A floral arrangement had been delivered incorrectly. She arrived to have it replaced. He was on a phone call, packing slowly near the window, speaking in low, rapid Korean. He glanced up when she entered. She got to work quietly, swapped the arrangement, and headed for the door. He ended the call. "The white ones," he said. She paused. "Keep the white ones, remove the rest." She looked at the arrangement. The white orchids were understated. Every other guest requested the dramatic tropical pieces. She pulled the other flowers out and left the orchids standing alone in the vase, clean and without performance. Min-ho looked at the arrangement for a moment. Then he returned to his call. Scarlett walked out. She told herself she was not smiling. She was, slightly. By the end of the first week, the staff had noticed. Mr. Kang had never cared about which staff member handled his floor. Now he specifically declined 2 other liaisons and waited, apparently without irritation, but with the focused patience of someone who had decided something. For Scarlett, Choi Yuna, his executive assistant, noticed too. She was a precise woman in her late 20s with razor-sharp instincts and a loyalty to Min-ho that felt almost territorial. She appeared in the service corridor on Thursday afternoon while Scarlett was reviewing the penthouse maintenance log. "Miss Vance." Her voice was professional, but her eyes were not. "I want to make sure you understand what your role here actually is." Scarlett looked up. "Guest relations supervisor, I'm pretty clear on it. Mr. Kang's schedule is very particular. His privacy is absolute. His professional focus cannot be disrupted." A pause that was not quite a pause. "He doesn't form personal attachments. He never has." "Whatever you think is happening." "I think," Scarlett said pleasantly, "that a VIP resident requested a specific liaison for professional service and I'm providing it. Is there a hotel policy I'm violating?" Yuna looked at her for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "Just be careful, Miss Vance. Men like him don't fall in degrees. When they fall completely. And the people closest to them get crushed in the aftermath." She walked away. Scarlett stood in the corridor for a moment, her clipboard against her chest, and reminded herself very firmly that she was leaving in 5 weeks, that she had a flight booked, that she did not need complications. Then she went upstairs and did her job. The executive dinner happened on a Friday evening. It was a private event. 3 senior investors and 2 international shipping directors gathered in the penthouse dining suite for a dinner that Min-ho had asked Scarlett to personally oversee. She moved through the room efficiently, managing service, ensuring the flow of the evening stayed smooth, staying largely in the background the way she had been trained to do. She didn't realize the conversation had shifted toward her until one of the investors, a heavy-set man with an expensive watch and no particular awareness of his own volume, made a comment to the colleague beside him. Not loud enough for the whole table. Just loud enough for her to catch it as she passed. Something about how progressive it was of Min-ho to hire from such diverse backgrounds. The word diverse delivered in the particular tone people used when they meant something else entirely, something smaller, something that was supposed to remind you of your place. Scarlett kept her expression neutral. She had been reminded of her place before, by better and worse people than this. She moved to refill a water glass at the far end of the table, and then Minho spoke. His voice didn't rise. It never rose. But something in the temperature of the room changed instantly. Director Shin. Calm, measured, absolute. The next time you comment on my staff instead of the agenda I invited you here for, I'll assume the meeting is concluded and have my team show you out. He looked at the man without any particular emotion, the way someone looks at a problem they are already solving. Scarlett. His eyes moved to her. Please ensure Director Shin's car is available whenever he's ready to leave. Implication was not subtle. The table went very quiet. Later, after the investors had gone and the dining room was being cleared, Scarlett found Minho on the terrace. The Busan night spread out below them like scattered light across black water. She stood beside him and looked at the city for a moment. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. Handled worse. Don't doubt it. She looked at him, the clean line of his profile. The way he stood like someone who had long since stopped being surprised by any room he walked into. Then why? He was quiet for a beat. Because watching people disrespect you irritates me, he said finally. Not romantic, not soft, just factual, almost worse because it sounded entirely honest. Scarlett looked back at the city. That's a strange reason. Real ones are. She left shortly after. She didn't look back. But she thought about that answer for the rest of the night, lying in the dark in her apartment while Talia slept, the city noise filtering through the window, turning those words over like something she hadn't decided what to do with yet. The following week something shifted in the texture of their daily interactions, so gradually that Scarlett almost didn't register it happening. Minho worked late. This was not new. What was new was that Scarlett started noticing the signs before he said anything. The way the dinner tray from room service came back barely touched. The way the lights in his study stayed on past 2 in the morning when she checked the building energy log as part of her closing routine. The dark circles accumulating under eyes that otherwise never betrayed fatigue. On Tuesday, she brought an additional meal up with the scheduled delivery and set it on the desk without comment. He looked at it, then at her. You didn't order this, he said. Kitchen had extra, she said. It seemed wasteful. He said nothing, but he ate it. On Thursday, she arrived for their routine morning check-in and found him at his desk with his eyes closed, head resting in one hand, clearly running on nothing. She didn't announce herself. She quietly lowered the blinds against the morning sun that was cutting directly across his desk, set his coffee within reach, and left without waking him. He texted her at noon. The message said, "Thank you," 2 words. She stared at them longer than she meant to. On Friday evening, she arrived for a late logistics discussion, and he was standing at the window again, shoulders carrying something she recognized as exhaustion that went deeper than the body. She stood beside him without speaking for a moment. When did you last sleep more than 4 hours? She asked. A pause. I don't remember. That's not sustainable. Neither is most of what I do. She looked at him sidelong. In the low light, he looked younger than his reputation. He looked for one unguarded moment, like a person who was simply very tired and had been for a very long time. Go to bed, Minho, she said quietly. He glanced at her. Not at the title, not at the professional greeting, just his name and her voice. Something moved behind his eyes. Very comfortable giving me orders, he said. Very comfortable pretending you don't need anyone to, she replied. Silence. Then he set his work down and walked toward his room. She let herself out. And she stood in the hallway for a moment, pressing her back against the wall and breathing, because something in her chest had started doing something she did not have language for, and she needed it to stop. Her best friend arrived from America on a Wednesday. Daniel Reed was 30 years old, comfortable and familiar in the way that only someone from your hometown could be. He had gone to high school with Scarlett, grown up 2 streets away, and had the specific ability to make her feel like herself again in a way that sometimes nothing else could. He was warm, easy to laugh with, steady. He loved her in the quiet, uncomplicated way of someone who had known her before she learned to protect herself. Scarlett met him for dinner across town and felt the first full exhale she'd released in weeks. You look different, Daniel said, studying her across the table. Different how? Like someone's been paying attention to you. She looked down at her menu. I work in a high-end residence. Everyone's professional there. That's not what I mean, and you know it. She did know it. She chose not to engage. The following afternoon, Daniel visited the hotel's lobby cafe while Scarlett had a brief break between shifts. They sat near the window, laughing about something from high school, and he had his hand over hers on the table in the easy, affectionate way they had always been with each other, platonic and unquestioned between them for their entire lives. Scarlett looked up and found Minho standing at the lobby entrance. He was not supposed to be in the lobby at that hour. He never came through the public lobby. His eyes landed on her. Then on Daniel's hand over hers, then back on her face. His expression did not change. But something in his eyes went very cold, very quiet, in the way that the surface of water goes still right before it goes deep. He crossed the lobby without stopping and took the private elevator to the penthouse. That evening, his communications were brief, clipped, precise. He canceled the routine check-in without explanation. He sent all requests through Yuna. Scarlett processed it professionally and said nothing, but she noticed. She noticed because she knew his patterns now in the way you know the patterns of something you have been quietly, helplessly paying attention to. And this pattern was new. Talia noticed too. He's jealous, she said simply, from across their apartment that night. He doesn't get jealous, Scarlett said. He barely registers other people's existence. Registered Daniel's hand on yours from 20 feet away and rearranged his entire schedule for the rest of the afternoon. Talia raised an eyebrow. Scarlett, baby. You need to figure out what you're doing. Nothing, Scarlett said firmly. I'm doing nothing. I have 4 weeks left. Feelings don't have countdown timers, babe. Mine do. She turned off her bedside light. But she didn't sleep. The night she found him asleep at his desk was the night something broke open inside her that she had been very carefully keeping sealed. She had come up for a late document delivery, using her keycard when there was no answer at the door, because the light under it indicated the building system still showed him awake. She expected to find him working. Instead, Minho was slumped forward across his desk, face turned to the side, eyes closed, one hand still loosely holding a pen. His dark hair fell across his forehead. The tailored jacket he had been wearing earlier was draped on the back of his chair. Without it, without the posture, without the awareness, he looked exactly like what he was. A 25-year-old man who had been running too hard on too little for too long. Scarlett stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she walked quietly to the reading chair nearby, removed the linen throw blanket folded over the arm of it, crossed the room, and draped it carefully over his shoulders. She set the documents on the edge of the desk where he would see them immediately. She lowered the desk lamp so the light wouldn't be harsh when he woke. She was almost to the door when she heard a quiet sound behind her. She stopped. Turned. His eyes were open. He had woken up. He was watching her across the quiet room with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not controlled. Not calculated. Just open in the way a face is when it doesn't have time to close itself before something real passes through it. She met his gaze. Neither of them said a word. Then Scarlett nodded once, quietly, and walked out. Minho sat in the lamplight for a long time after she left. The blanket still over his shoulders. He did not move it. He pressed 2 fingers against his mouth and stared at the door and understood something that frightened him more than any business rival or territorial threat had in years. He was in serious trouble. A few days later, Yuna came to find Scarlett during her lunch break. She didn't sit. She stood with her arms crossed and her expression arranged into something that was not quite hostility but was adjacent to it. You think you're special, Yuna said, because he looks at you differently. Scarlett put down her fork. He's a client. I do my job well, whatever you're suggesting. Not suggesting anything. Yuna's voice dropped. I'm telling you a fact. Minho was not always like this. He was different before. He trusted someone completely, someone who used that trust to take something from him that almost destroyed his entire organization. He had to rebuild from almost nothing, and he had to do it while nobody saw how close it came. She paused. Has not let anyone inside since then. Not one person. Scarlett said nothing. Like him, don't fall softly, Yuna continued. They consume, and when they get hurt, they don't just break. They go very quiet, very still, and they never let it happen again. Her eyes met Scarlett's directly. Except now he's making exceptions, and I need to know if you understand what that means. Scarlett held her gaze. What does it mean? It means whatever you do next matters more than you think it does. Yuna left. Scarlett sat alone with her untouched lunch and the specific quiet of someone who has just been told something they were not ready to hear. She told him 3 weeks before her contract ended. She hadn't planned the conversation. She had gone upstairs to confirm logistics for an upcoming event, and somehow between the window and the desk it came out. I'm leaving Korea in 6 weeks, she said. My contract ends. I have a transfer approved back to Chicago. The room was very quiet. Minho set down the file he was holding. He didn't look at her immediately. He looked at the window, at the city, at the distance between him and everything he kept himself from. Then he looked at her. "And if someone asked you to stay," he said. His voice was careful, measuring something. Scarlett felt the weight of the question settle somewhere in her chest. She thought about her ex-boyfriend in Chicago. About the way power had distorted that relationship, turned it into something that looked like love from the outside and felt like drowning from the inside. About what happened when you let someone powerful decide they owned your presence. "Powerful men don't stay," she said quietly. "They possess." She watched the words land. Something shifted in his face. Not offense. Worse than offense. Recognition. Because it described exactly what he had become after the betrayal. Exactly the walls he had built. Exactly the way he had turned his capacity for care into control, because caring without control had cost him everything. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I know." She left. And Kang Min-ho stood at the window for a long time that night, looking at the harbor lights and thinking about what it would mean to be different. Not for strategy, not for acquisition. For her, she started avoiding him after that. Not dramatically, just professionally. She rerouted requests through the secondary liaison system. She kept her responses to messages brief and efficient. She stopped coming upstairs during off-peak hours. She told herself it was the right thing. She told herself she was 6 weeks from her real life. She told herself that the warmth she felt in that penthouse was a product of proximity and loneliness and a very beautiful city at night, and that none of it was real in the way things needed to be real to survive distance. She almost believed it. Then Talia burst into their apartment on a Tuesday morning holding her phone and said, "Scarlett, you need to see this." It was a business news alert. Kang Maritime had withdrawn from the Seoul Singapore expansion agreement, a deal that had taken 2 years to negotiate. $14 billion in projected revenue over the first 5 years alone. The press was calling it a catastrophic miscalculation. Minho's rivals were already circling. Expansion would have required him to relocate to Singapore, Talia said carefully. "Permanently." Scarlett stared at the screen. "Talia?" I asked around. It was always on the table. Everyone knew the relocation requirement was non-negotiable. He agreed to it 18 months ago. Timeline landed on Scarlett like something physical. 18 months ago, before she had ever been assigned to his floor. Before broken glass and a calm voice in the dark and white orchids standing alone in a vase. "It was a coincidence," Scarlett said. Talia looked at her with the specific expression of someone who loves you enough not to lie to you. "Babe," she said gently. "No, it wasn't." She went upstairs that evening shaking with something that was not anger but had borrowed anger's clothes because anger was easier to carry. She let herself in. He was at his desk. He saw her face when she walked in and something in him went very still. "Why would you do that?" she said. He didn't ask what she was referring to. "I made a business decision," he said carefully. "You destroyed a $14 billion deal. I withdrew from a deal that no longer aligned with my priorities." "Oh." Her voice broke slightly on his name, and she hated it, hated that it did that, hated that her composure was fracturing right now in front of the person she most needed to hold it together around. "You can't do that. You can't make decisions like that because of me. You barely know me." He stood up. And something she had never seen before happened to his face. The careful construction of it. The control he wore the way other men wore armor. It didn't shatter. It simply, quietly, came down. "No, you bring extra food up when you think I've forgotten to eat," he said. His voice was rough in a way she had never heard it. "I know you arranged the orchids the exact same way the second time without me telling you. I know you put a blanket over me in the dark and left before I could feel embarrassed about needing it. I know you told me powerful men don't stay, and you were right about what I was." He stopped, breathed. "I know that every room feels empty after you leave it." Silence, her chest was hurting, actually physically hurting. "And I am so tired," he said, quieter now, the words pulled from somewhere that had been sealed for a long time, "of pretending I can survive another goodbye." She crossed the room. She didn't make a decision. She just stopped not doing what she had been not doing for weeks, and she kissed him, and he held her like she was the first real thing he had touched in years. She pulled back first, not immediately, not easily, but she pulled back, breathless, her forehead against his, both of them not speaking for a moment, just breathing the same small space of air. "I'm still leaving," she whispered. "I know," he said. He was still holding her face. Like she was something he did not fully trust to stay real. "But not tonight." That night she went back to her apartment and sat on the bathroom floor and cried in the quiet, controlled way she had learned to cry when she didn't want Talia to hear. She cried because it was already too late. It had probably been too late for weeks, and she had told herself it hadn't been because she needed the lie. She cried because she knew how this ended. She had seen this before. A powerful man who decided he wanted her. The slow rearrangement of her life around his needs. The way love with power always tilted, always shifted, always eventually became about who was willing to shrink. She was done shrinking. She started packing that night. She was at the airline booking page when her phone rang, unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Miss Vance. The voice was male, smooth, and absolutely cold. We need to speak about your relationship with Min-ho. Certain parties have taken an interest in your presence in his life. Scarlett's hand went still. I don't know who you are, she said evenly. No, but you should. A pause. And Min-ho should know that the people who destroyed his organization 3 years ago have been watching this whole time, waiting for the moment he made himself vulnerable again. Another pause, pointed. Congratulations, you appear to be that moment. Line went dead. Scarlett sat in the silence for approximately 30 seconds. Then she called Talia. I need you to listen to me very carefully, she said. Don't go anywhere tonight, lock the door, and tell me if anyone you don't recognize comes near the building. Scarlett, what happened? I don't know yet. She grabbed her jacket and went upstairs. Min-ho opened the door before she could knock. He had already heard something. She could see it in his face, the shift in his posture, the way his eyes scanned her immediately before she even spoke. She told him about the call. What happened in the next 30 seconds terrified her, not because he raged, not because he screamed, but because he went that particular quiet. The one that wasn't absence of feeling. The one that was feeling concentrated into something that had a very specific purpose. He made one phone call. In Korean, clipped low, then he looked at Talia's address on his phone. She's already secure, he said. My team is outside your building, Scarlett stared. Your team? He met her eyes. Did you think the shipping CEO was the whole story? She had known. She had always half known and half chosen not to examine it directly because examining it would have meant making a different decision earlier, and she hadn't been ready for that decision. She looked at him now in the full knowledge of what he was, who he was, both titles. How long have you had someone on me? She said. Since the 3rd day, he said, not apologetically, just factually. When I realized you had no idea who you were walking into rooms with, and that made you exposed in ways you couldn't account for. That should terrify me. I know. It should make me walk out of here right now. I know that too. She stood there. The city outside the window, the two of them in the center of it on the 43rd floor, the world below them doing all the things the world did without asking anyone's permission. Tell me the truth, she said. All of it. And he did. It took an hour. He told her about the betrayal 3 years ago. A partner, someone he had trusted with everything, who had handed the organization's vulnerabilities to a rival faction in exchange for money and his own protection. He told her what it had cost. He told her about the 3 years of rebuilding in silence, of learning to trust no one, of becoming the kind of man who could afford to be cold, because cold was sustainable and warm had nearly destroyed him. He told her about the people who had been watching, waiting for him to open himself again so they could use that opening, and he told her that he knew the risk. He told her that he had understood the risk since approximately the night she had put a blanket over him in the dark and left without asking for anything in return. And you still, she started, he said, looked at her, for a long time. Because some things, he said finally, are worth the risk of being human again. Danger came 4 days later. Scarlett was on her way back from a morning errand when 2 men she didn't recognize fell into step behind her on a narrow street off the main shopping corridor. She had lived in enough cities to know the specific quality of being followed, the synchronization of footsteps, the mirrored pace. She kept walking. She did not run. She pulled out her phone. Min-ho picked up on the first ring. Have a problem, she said calmly. 2 men behind me. Songwon Alley near the East Market. She heard him move. She heard a door. Keep walking, he said. His voice was different, not the boardroom voice, not even the quiet penthouse voice. Something under all of those, something older and more dangerous. Don't stop, don't turn, my team is 3 minutes from you. Ho, I have you, he said. I have you, keep walking. The next 90 seconds were the longest of her life. Then she heard running feet from ahead, not behind, and 2 of Min-ho's people came around the corner moving fast, and the men behind her peeled away immediately. Professionals recalculating, and she was being directed into a car, and the door was closed, and she sat in the backseat with her hands in her lap and her breathing too fast, and the city moving outside the window. Min-ho was already at the residence when they brought her back. He met her in the lobby. He looked at her face and said nothing, just put one hand on the back of her neck briefly, checking, making sure she was real and intact, and then he stepped back and his jaw was tight and his eyes were doing the thing where they went very quiet and very decided. "People behind this," he said to the man beside him, in Korean, very low. "I want names by morning." She didn't ask for a translation. She didn't need one. Later that night, much later, after Talia had been checked on and confirmed safe and furiously demanding explanations that Scarlett could not fully give, after the security briefings and the calls and the quiet storm of logistics that Min-ho's world required in moments like this, Scarlett sat in his penthouse in the reading chair with a cup of tea going cold in her hands, and Min-ho sat on the floor a few feet away, his back against the couch, and they were both just breathing. "This is your life," she said softly, not accusatory, just true. "Yes," he said. "It doesn't scare me," she said, and she realized, saying it, that it was accurate. She had been afraid of plenty of things about him. His power, his possessiveness, the way her own feelings had ambushed her. But the danger of his world didn't frighten her the way she thought it should, maybe because she had seen what he was underneath it. Maybe because she had put a blanket over that version of him and he had looked at her with an open face and neither of them had needed to say anything. "It should," he said. "Probably." She looked at him. "But I think the things we're most afraid of are usually the wrong things." He watched her face. "What are you afraid of?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "That you'll see all of me," she said, "and decide some of it isn't worth keeping." He moved, crossed the space between them and crouched in front of her chair, his hands wrapping around hers where they held the cold cup. His eyes, up close, were nothing like the eyes he showed the rest of the world. They were warm in the specific way of things that have been kept very carefully protected. "That," he said, "is not a risk you are carrying alone." Transfer confirmation arrived in her email the following morning, Chicago. Her old position reinstated with a promotion. Familiar city. Familiar life. The clean exit she had planned from the beginning. She stared at it for a long time. She thought about the version of herself who had booked that flight 6 weeks ago. The woman who had decided that leaving first was the only protection that worked. That people with power always tilted the relationship until you were the one giving and they were the one taking. That love was a resource that powerful people extracted. She thought about a man who had canceled a $14 billion deal not to possess her. Not to make her stay. Just because leaving had stopped being something he was willing to do. She thought about a blanket in the dark. White orchids. A voice that said, "I have you." An open face that had not expected to be seen. Scarlett deleted the email. She stood at her apartment window for a moment, looking at Busan in the morning light. Then she changed into her second-best outfit, the deep burgundy one that Talia always said made her look like she owned every room she walked into. She put on the small gold earrings that had been her grandmother's. She did her makeup the way she liked it, soft and precise and entirely herself. Then she went upstairs. She used her keycard one last time. Min-ho was at his desk. He looked up immediately the way he had started doing, like some part of him was always listening for her. He saw her face and went very still. She stood in the doorway and looked at him, at the whole of him. The part that ran an empire, the part that had rebuilt from ruin, the part that ate untouched dinners in dark rooms and couldn't sleep and had quietly, methodically, rearranged his entire life because a woman in a burgundy blazer had looked at him like he was a difficult client and nothing else. And that had been the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to him. "I spent my whole life leaving first," she said. She walked into the room, and the door swung closed behind her. He stood up slowly. "I'm tired of running," she said, "and I think you deserve someone who stays." He crossed the room, not fast. The way you move toward something you are afraid might disappear if you startle it. His hand came up and he touched her face, her cheek, her jaw, with the careful attention of someone who has learned not to take presence for granted. "Have to tell you something," he said. She waited. "I have never." He stopped. His voice had that roughness again, the one she had only heard a handful of times, the one that meant the careful version of him had stepped aside. "I have never asked anyone to stay, not once, not even people I thought I loved before." His thumb moved across her cheekbone. "I'm asking you." "I know," she said. "Scarlett." "I'm already here," she said. "I stayed." He kissed her, and it was nothing like the first time, which had been sudden and breathless and edged with grief. This was different. slow and deliberate and full of something that had been building for months through orchids and blankets and untouched dinners, and two people standing at windows looking at the same city from their separate sides of the same wall. This felt like the wall coming down. 6 months later, Busan in April was all blossom trees and salt wind off the harbor. Talia cried at the ceremony, which she had sworn she would not do, and then cried harder when Scarlett pointed out that she was crying, which made Scarlett laugh in the middle of what was supposed to be a very dignified moment. Minho looked at Scarlett laughing, and something in his face did the thing that his executive team still occasionally had trouble processing because it disrupted all their calibrated readings of him. He smiled. The real one. The one that was still rare enough to feel like sunlight through cloud. It was small, private, just the people who mattered. Talia in a burnt orange dress. Daniel giving a toast that made everyone laugh and then unexpectedly cry. Yuna in the back row with her arms crossed and a look on her face that was trying very hard not to be moved and completely failing. When the officiant asked Minho if he would stand by her, protect her, choose her every day regardless of what those days contained, he didn't look at the officiant. He looked at Scarlett. Yes, he said, and it was the simplest thing, and it was the truest. 8 months after that, on a quiet Thursday morning in their penthouse that now had different energy, warmer, fuller, with a second coffee cup and a throw blanket that lived permanently on the reading chair, and a vase of white orchids that got replaced every week without being requested, Scarlett sat at the kitchen table with a small box in her hand. She looked at it for a long time. Then she heard his footsteps. He came in from his study and stopped when he saw her face. He had learned her face the way she had learned his, all the languages of it. What is it? He said. She set the box on the table. He looked at it, then at her. And something cracked across his face the way light cracks across water. He crossed the kitchen and dropped to his knees in front of her chair, both hands taking hers, his eyes very bright. Are you sure? He managed. 11 weeks, she said. Her voice was not quite steady. Neither was his face. He pressed his forehead to their joined hands. She felt the exhale move through him. Long and slow and from somewhere very deep, like a man releasing something he had been holding for a very long time. When he looked up, Kang Minho was not the cold CEO. He was not the mafia boss who made entire rooms recalibrate their behavior when he entered. He was not the man who had learned to survive by needing nothing. He was just a person, in love, undone. Have you? He whispered. The same words from a different night, a different kind of danger. The same absolute meaning. Both of you, I have you. She pulled him up and into her and held on. Outside, Busan went on doing what it did, indifferent and brilliant, ships crossing the harbor, the city breathing. And inside, on the 43rd floor, in the penthouse where it had all started with broken glass and a calm voice in the dark, and a woman who refused to be afraid, and a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be held, two people sat together in the morning light and chose, quietly and completely, to stay.